It seems to me the question for the BBC is whether, in all the circumstances, listening to everything this individual said, racial hatred is likely to be stirred up by what was broadcast.
Now, a big story of the day, I suppose, has been this question from a political discourse point of view about what happened at Glastonbury and the band. What's it called again?
Bob Vylan.
Bob Vylan. It's gone out of my mind.
Yes,
anyway,
Bob Vylan.
Bob Vylan. There's a political, there's a moral aspect to it, but is there a legal aspect to it? That's the question we've been mulling over, and we didn't know the answer to it, so we thought we'd better find out. They led the crowd in chants of death to the IDF. They called a record industry boss a Zionist and a word beginning with C. What is the law on what people can and cannot say? Joining us now is Jonathan Rozenberg KC to unpack
Joshua.
the legal. Joshua, I'm so sorry, Joshua. I know it's you. I know you're Joshua.
Often said, often made mistakes.
Do you know what it is? I've done an anchorman and read out an inaccurate thing in front of me. Of course, I know you're called Joshua. Now, I'd like to ask you a question. First, on the pure and simple death to the IDF. It's upset people, but the IDF is a military organisation that is not going to be harmed by people chanting in a field. It's not going to get any more aggression directed at it on the battlefield. Is it a hate crime still to say something like that in your view, or could it be?
I think it's a question of context. You're absolutely right that if you're simply calling for the defeat in war of a foreign army, well, that's not necessarily hate speech. But there are Israeli soldiers who have British nationality. There are Israeli soldiers in the UK. If there was any suggestion that anybody was being encouraged to kill a British person who happens to have served in the Israel Defence Forces, then yes, I think that would be an offence.
So it's not impossible, because he wasn't suggesting that, you wouldn't imagine. He was trying to get a catchy view that says he condemns the IDF. I mean, we don't know, do we? I guess is the point.
We don't know. But I think you have to look at the whole thing in context, and you have to look at what he was saying, and you have to look at how it would be perceived. Because if you look at the offence that the BBC might be charged with, which is Section 22 of the Public Order Act 1986, this relates to programme controllers, and if there is material from somebody which is intended to stir up racial hatred, or having regard to all the circumstances racial hatred is likely to be stirred up, then the people providing the programme service are committing an offence. And it seems to me the question for the BBC is whether, in all the circumstances, listening to everything this individual said, racial hatred is likely to be stirred up by what was broadcast.
So is it plausible that the BBC could be prosecuted? I mean, the free speech in me probably wouldn't want a broadcaster to be prosecuted for doing this, even if I thought what they published was wrong.
Well, look at the story in the Times today. It says that BBC staff were given new guidelines on broadcasting hate speech last week, according to the Times. The guidelines say material that contains hate speech should not be included in output unless it's justified by the context. It says that broadcasting hate speech could constitute a criminal offence if it's intended or likely to stir up hatred relating to race, or intended to stir up hatred relating to religious belief. So clearly the BBC is concerned, as you would expect. It doesn't want to break the law. It doesn't want its staff to break the law. And it's worth saying that if the BBC was prosecuted, then it would be fined if it was found guilty, because you can't do anything else with the corporation. But if you look at the law, there's a specific provision in the law which says that where a body corporate is guilty of an offence under this part of the Public Order Act, and it's shown that the offence was committed with the consent or connivance of somebody who was in charge, well, that person, as well as the body corporate, is guilty of an offence.
What about the From the River to the Sea? Because if you look at the whole, I watched it live actually, and there was the From the River to the Sea, which some people regard as a statement wanting to remove the existence of Israel. There's the death to the IDF. And then the final thing is this anecdote he told about a Zionist, as he called him, member of the record community, which people felt was very filled with anti-Semitic tropes. Is that taken together sufficient to be classed as hate speech or parts of hate speech? How does that work?
That's certainly arguable. I mean, I'm not the prosecutor, and the police will look at the evidence and they have to consult not just with the Crown Prosecution Service, but they have to get the approval of the Attorney General. But my argument would be that taken as a whole, the impact on that audience, and crucially on the audience watching at home, would be to stir up racial hatred. Now, you may say that Jews are not a race as such. Some people are offended by the phrase the Jewish race. But if you look at what the courts have decided, they have taken the view that Jews are a race and a religion. So I would say there's certainly a case to answer that it's likely that racial hatred was stirred up by that broadcast.
Joshua, a lot of people have got in touch this morning with this question of Lucy Connolly.
Yes.
And said, two-tier system, Lucy Connolly encourages people, she says a racist thing that encourages people, was found to encourage people to perhaps go off and attack an asylum hotel or commit a crime of, she committed a crime of incitement. And people saying, well, this is not going to be prosecuted in the same way, it's a two-tier system. How would you distinguish between the two cases?
I think that's nonsense. First of all, there's no decision yet as to whether this man and indeed the BBC are going to be prosecuted. The alleged offence took place 2 days ago. This needs careful review by the police. It needs careful review by lawyers. You can't possibly say that there are no prosecutions likely as a result of what was said and broadcast on Saturday. Secondly, she was convicted under a separate provision of the Public Order Act. She admitted it. This is a provision which says that a person who publishes or distributes written material which is threatening, abusive or insulting is guilty of an offence if that person intends to stir up racial hatred, or having regard to all the circumstances, racial hatred is likely to be stirred up thereby. Very similar. This relates to written documents. The other was the BBC, and there's a third offence, obviously, for spoken remarks, which Pascal Robinson Foster might well face himself if that's what prosecutors decide. All come under the same area of the Public Order Act. All have a maximum prison sentence of 7 years if prosecuted in the Crown Court. All are serious offences, all may be quite tricky to prosecute, but you can't say that just because she was convicted, having admitted the offence and no charges have yet been brought against this man or the BBC, that it's being treated in a two-tier way.
But would you say, just finally, Joshua, they're in the same ballpark?
Yes, because the two offences, the one I've mentioned under Section 22 and the one that she admitted under Section 19, all come under the same part of the Public Order Act 1986.
Really interesting stuff. Kate said about 3 hours ago, I'd really like to have an experienced lawyer explain this to us all, and you've just done that, Joshua, so we're ever so grateful.
Pleasure.
That's Joshua Rozenberg there, KC.
Yeah, really, really good to get that full breakdown of exactly what is involved here.
I didn't realise the BBC could be prosecuted for this, actually, and that's very clearly how he set that out.
Yeah, some pretty big questions which will continue to be asked.